Fukushima and how their stories on it go. They call it 3/11, the day of the attack, their terrorist attack. So without further ado, he's on for an hour. He's a very informative person. I'm going to probably try to get it all on there. You might not want to try to listen to it all right now, as I know time is very important to everybody. But I think this is a good way of spending your time. So please listen. And if you enjoy it, click on the next segment. Enjoy that as well. And hopefully learn a few things. Alright, here we go. Oh, and we're going through East Hampton now.
Please welcome onto the bridge of the mothership, the one and the only Douglas Dietrich. Welcome back, my friend.
It's great to be here, Mr. Wells, and thank you so much for having me again, and thank you so much to the audience for spending the most valuable possession that they have with us, which is their time.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah, you bet, sir, and let's make it worth their time. We've got about 14 points, like Martin Luther, to cover on Fukushima, and with your permission, sir, I'll start on those 14 Fukushima points right now.
Mr. Dietrich, you will do more in 1 hour than forums and blogs will do in 2 weeks. I'm just going to stay out of your way, so let her rip.
You're the best, sir, and don't be afraid to guide me when I get off course. Just as you said, the first annual March 11th memorial anniversary of Fukushima Daiichi is upon us, and it's already March 11th in Asia, and still entirely unknown to most Americans. An ever-increasing proportion of the Japanese body politic refers to Fukushima, the Big One nuclear power plant facility disaster, as Sanjuichi, or the 3/11 terrorist attack, because simultaneous, actually 21 minutes before the super tsunami hitting the Daiichi, the Big One cluster of nuclear power facilities at Fukushima, the plants went into meltdown. Now, this was almost certainly due to the earthquake, but what happened was that simultaneous to the earthquake causing the cracks in the facilities leading to a meltdown, a cyber virus disabled the plant's automated safety systems and prevented the integrated fail-safes from activating. This led to a criticality of confidential compromises. Now, because of Japan's pre-war experience with petroleum dependency on the United States, when it got 95% of its oil from the United States and then had it all cut off before Pearl Harbor, Japan now depends on nuclear power to meet 95% of its energy needs, to prevent any future violations of its national sovereignty through petroleum leveraging. Now,
the only thing I would ask you to do, Douglas, is just slow down just a little bit, because this is some heavy stuff and I want everybody to absorb it. We got a long way to go, and the whole hour is yours, so just make sure that this sticks to our heads.
Yes, sir. And to give a perspective on the importance of nuclear power to Japan, once again, because of its pre-war experience with 95% energy dependence on American petroleum back in the days before World War II, when the United States was the Saudi Arabia to the world and supplied the world's oil, because the United States, unlike anyone else on Earth at the time, had the technology to develop its domestic oil assets, and it had an enormous amount of sweet light crude that literally bubbled to the surface. And it used a lot of that to float all of the Allies in the Second World War. But before the Second World War, it sold an enormous amount of it to Japan. So when it cut off all of that oil supply to Japan, the Japanese, that was one of the factors that forced the Japanese into war. And to prevent something like that from happening again, they now meet 95% of their energy needs through nuclear power. Obviously, the atomic weapons in World War II did nothing to create some kind of psychological cultural scar, which made them afraid of nuclear energy. Quite the opposite. They embraced it, and atomic Gojira, our Godzilla, has even become a beloved national mascot. So to destabilize Japan's nuclear power base is to threaten modern Japanese civilization itself at its very foundations. And that's exactly what happened with the Fukushima Daiichi catastrophe. But we need to compare it to Chernobyl, which is another nuclear catastrophe that has taken place. And a lot of people think of the Chernobyl comparison, and they don't realize that in Japan's case, what they had were containment vessels as opposed to Chernobyl. So I'm not going to downplay the catastrophe of Fukushima Daiichi at all, but I want to put it into perspective for the American public so that they don't feel that they themselves are threatened to any great degree, but I don't want them to dismiss the problem. Again, the power plant at Chernobyl in Ukraine, the former constituent Soviet Republic of the Ukraine, lacked any genuinely functional containment vessel. Now, the 3 impacted nuclear power plants at Fukushima were all constructed with functional containment vessels. So the Japanese have been taking advantage of that to be continuously flushing the radiation released by the 3 impacted plants in question out to sea, where the radiation becomes everyone else's problem. This is not a good thing, but at the same time, it prevents the locality of Japan from becoming irreparably contaminated. And the winds take care, if you will, of a good deal of the rest by blowing the air-rated radiation sourcing from Fukushima cluster to settle in the extremely underpopulated vastnesses of Siberia. And ultimately, the worst aspect of Japanese civilization that's going to be impacted will be the fishing industry on the Pacific coast of the Japanese archipelago. And perforce of radiation retention in fish, which is somewhat analogous to mercury retention, they're going to become increasingly dependent on Australian tuna ranges. But all of these current Japanophobic claims that 2/3 of Japan have been rendered uninhabitable, they literally source from the exact same type of propaganda claims extolled by the U.S. military in 1945.
Now, who's putting that stuff out, Douglas? Who's putting it out?
I believe that what's going on right now is that there's a lot of fear-mongering, and one of the reasons why is that there are a lot of people who want people to be afraid of this in order to sell potassium iodide. Now, there's nothing wrong with this, but you have to check with a doctor before you take it. If you go to places like Archangel or Murmansk in the former Soviet Union, which were big submarine ports, they have nuclear submarines that are literally stacked one on top of the other, and their hulls are cracked open. And in cities like that, people take potassium iodide every day like it's a vitamin supplement. And instead of thermometers, which tell you what temperature it is in all of the major cities, everywhere you look on top of banks or various other facilities, you see radiometers, which tell you what the ambient radiation is in the surrounding area. That's how these people have learned to live. Now, the people in Japan, in the area of Fukushima cluster, may ultimately have to learn to live like that. But if it were truly at the point where 2/3 of Japan were uninhabitable or 95% irradiated, I'll give you an example of what would happen. You would have 20 million Japanese boat people resettling on the western coast of North America by now. And the Kuroshio, or the Japanese current, goes only one direction, from Japan towards the United States. And on June 28th of 1980, a crew of 6 Japanese men sailing the Yasugo 3, which was a 43-foot double-canoed catamaran built according to a design found on stone paintings back in Japan, proven to be 5,000 years old, landed in San Francisco. And they crossed the Pacific from Tokyo by following the Kuroshio, and equipped with only sails, a rudder, and a centerboard, propelled only by the winds and the current. The boat logged 170 miles a day, traveled 5,000 nautical miles to arrive in San Francisco 7 days ahead of calculated schedule. And on June 14th of 1962, 2 decades before the voyage of the Yasugo Trix, San Francisco Chronicle reported a young Japanese man sailing alone in a 19-foot sloop from Osaka Kobe to San Francisco. It took him 73 days from May 12th through July 24th of 1962, and it only took him that long because he had endured 5 storms. So you can see why entire families would be here if Japan were that impacted. But in a very real sense, it is that impacted because all of this ambient radiation is ultimately carried on a much lower level down towards Tokyo. And to put this into perspective for you, this is known as the Kanto area of the Tokyo metropolis combined with Yokohama. Now, Tokyo is the largest city on planet Earth. It's got 30 million inhabitants, and it's so enormous, both in terms of territory and in population, that it cannot be governed by a mayor. There's no mayor for the city of Tokyo. It's governed by a governor. So there's an actual governor that governs Tokyo. It's that big. Now, combined with Yokohama, it's known as the Kanto Supermegalopolitan Belt. And because they are exposed to so much radiation, enough to have everyone concerned about the long-term effects, Japan has started to invest in what is known as Obayashi Corporation's Cablevator, which is an elevator that they want to build into space, which is a series of cables that are linked to a fixed satellite, or a satellite in fixed stationary orbit. And this would lead to incredibly cheap and safer space travel, and materials coming down the other way would make the cost effectively zero. But the problem is, of course, they're entering another area of high radiation. So the Japanese are going to leave one irradiated neighborhood that may be subject to many more earthquakes, that could do much more damage to nuclear facilities, to go into an even higher radiation environment, and probably become the vanguard for humanity's colonization of space because of this omega point in human history. And
okay, wait a second. Go ahead and finish that little point. Then let's go back and recapitulate here a little bit. Man, you are going fast tonight. This is unbelievable. Are you telling me they want to string a cable up into space?
Yes, of course.
Yes, that's quite right. We're talking about, I put some articles about this on my Facebook, which is accessible through my website, and basically that will give some more of the technical details. But it's thanks to carbon nanotubing. Thanks to that development in engineering, we're moving towards overcoming the engineering and design complications. And with this cable vader that would stretch literally a quarter of the way to the moon, it would take a week to reach the observation deck. And so a lot of people are decrying this, saying it's impossible, but these are the same kind of people who would have said it would have been impossible to have built the Great Wall of China. And as I've said before on this program, there are only two man-made objects visible without telescopic aid from the surface of the moon. One of them is the Great Wall of China, and the other is the Korean demilitarized zone. But the primary protestation source not from the engineering problems, which everyone knows can ultimately be conquered, but from the threat of radiation, because this radiant energy is entered, this atmosphere of radiant energy is entered as soon as we leave Earth's atmosphere. So risks are at least in low Earth orbit, but as you get towards the Van Allen radiation belt and beyond, solar flares in particular, which intensify every 11 years, will create enormous problems for people traveling up the elevator, just as they do for anyone who's going up in a space capsule or in the shuttle. So we're talking about the need to constantly monitor solar weather that would be a part of this entire construction effort. But to give you an example of why I say it's strategic in impact, just as the Great Wall of China ultimately stemmed a lot of the tide of barbarian invasions into China, in which case they turned towards Europe, it ultimately led, by construction and completion of the Great Wall of China, to the downfall of the Roman Empire by the divergence of the barbarians. With the Japanese building something of strategic importance on a comparable level with a space elevator that would go all the way up as high as this does, well above the atmosphere, so that objects can be brought up into a non-atmospheric environment and then go straight to the moon or Mars, then we are talking about something that's going to have strategic impact over the rest of the world. It could lead to the success of civilizations and the collapse of civilizations.
You know, Douglas, this is what's really scary about this. If everything really is written already, and we're just walking through it, then we've only got a couple of minutes here, so I'll try to be brief, and I don't think you're going to get much of a chance to respond before we have to go chop.
Right.
But wouldn't it be strange if all of this is written in advance? I mean, this almost suggests that through a series of heinous historical events, the Japanese are actually being conditioned to be the first colonizers of outer space?
I believe that it's a kind of manifest destiny that even they do not appreciate. No one appreciates the difficulties that force one to innovate, and innovation is almost always a product of dire necessity. If we're fat and happy and comfortable, we're not going to do anything other than sit back and enjoy life until life basically comes back and bites us. And in a sense, that's what's happened to Japan. Japan, unlike America's impression of Japan, has actually been going through an incredibly high increase in quality of life, even after the 1995 earthquake, which was artificially generated, which I do want to discuss, which helped to lead to a tremendous economic decline. What they did at that time was they divested in America, they revested in communist China, and they were really behind the Chinese economic boom because they provided a lot of producers' goods as opposed to consumers' goods. Meaning,
all right, let's hold it right there, my friend. Let's hold it right there and pick up where you left off. I also want to get a body count.
Yeah, body
not to use
count.
that crude expression, but I want to know
But
how
you
many
used it,
fatalities
though.
there were at Fukashima, and I want to go back to Stuxnet.
All right.
If you would like to. Douglas.
Well, hopefully you'll hear the rest. This has been Earthquake, March 11th, the first one, first anniversary. All right, love you guys. Have a great day. See ya.